Welcome to this deep dive. We've got a fascinating one lined up for you all today, diving into Yuval Noah Harari's Sapiens, a brief history of humankind.
A real thought-provoking read.
It is. It isn't your typical history book, more like it really makes you think differently about what it means to be human.
Harari has this way of taking everything we think we know about ourselves and flipping it on its head.
Exactly. Like right off the bat, he calls early humans, get this, insignificant animals.
Insignificant.
Yeah, he compares them to jellyfish, in terms of how much impact they had.
Whoa.
Can you imagine? Us, not the big dogs on campus.
Hard to picture.
Right. So how do we go from, insignificant to running the whole show?
Well, that's where the cognitive revolution comes into play. Around 70,000 years ago, something big happened to Homo sapiens. And it wasn't just about, bigger brains or anything.
Yeah.
Harari says it was the rise of fictive language.
Fictive language. What's that, then?
It's not just about saying, hey, I need food, or whatever. It's the ability to talk about stuff that isn't actually real. Gods, nations, even corporations.
Wait, you're saying corporations aren't real? Try telling that to my boss.
Well, not real in the sense that, a mountain is real. They exist because we all agree to believe in them. Harari calls these imagined realities, and he thinks they're the key to why we're top of the food chain now.
Hold on, so you mean my company, my salary, all just stories we tell ourselves?
In a way, yeah. Think about it like when you watch a movie with friends. You all laugh at the same parts, maybe cry at the same parts, even though it's not really happening.
Yeah.
That shared feeling, that's the power of a story, even a made-up one.
Okay, I think I see what you're getting at.
It's the same with these bigger ideas, nations and all that. They only work because we've collectively agreed, okay, this is what matters.
This is a lot to take in, but, building our whole world on stories, that's kind of amazing.
It is. And that ability to get on the same page, to cooperate on such a massive scale, that's what let us outcompete other humans, spread out everywhere, and basically become the rulers of the planet.
So campfire stories to, civilizations, all thanks to a bit of imagination?
Precisely.
Makes you think, but if we're being honest, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Right. This power we have, this imagination, it has a downside too.
Oh, like how?
Well, Harari takes us back even further, before organized anything, really. He says that just Homo sapiens spreading out had huge consequences.
You mean like the megafauna extinction? I read a bit about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, extinctions happen, but Harari makes a strong case that wherever humans went, boom, mass extinction soon after.
No way.
Giant sloths in the Americas, giant wombats in Australia, gone. He calls this ecological serial killers, which is a bit much, but...
So we were messing things up long before the Industrial Revolution.
Long before. He calls it the first wave extinction. A pretty stark look at us, And it makes you think, what else have we done that we don't even realize yet?
Makes you think indeed. So last time we were talking about the first wave extinction, and wow, that was heavy stuff, It really makes you think about our place in the world. But we were just getting to the agricultural revolution, which is usually seen as this big leap forward for humanity.
Yeah, that's the thing about Harari. He really challenges those assumptions we have, like the agricultural revolution, not necessarily the upgrade we think it was.
Seriously, farming, that's how we got civilizations and everything, right?
Sure, it led to all that. But Harari argues that for the average Joe, life before farming, back when we were hunter-gatherers, might have actually been better in a lot of ways.
Wait, better? How so?
Think about it. Hunter-gatherers, they had a more diverse diet, more free time, and fewer problems with diseases.
Really? It's not like it was easy street out there, right? Constantly on the move, dodging wild animals, other tribes.
Of course there were challenges.
Yeah.
But the thing is, farming brought its own set of problems. Less varied food, more work, and a higher chance of famine and illness.
So we traded in our freedom and easy living for, what, stability?
In a way, yes. And it's not like we had some big meeting and decided this was the best course of action. It was more like a gradual thing, a bunch of short-term choices that eventually added up to a completely different way of life.
And we're stuck with the consequences, even today.
Exactly. It really makes you wonder about the choices we're making now and what their long-term effects might be, right?
No kidding. But how does this all tie back to, well, everything else? You mentioned our relationship with the environment.
Think about it. Hunter-gatherers, they lived with nature. Farming, on the other hand, it's all about controlling nature. We bend it to our will, and that often backfires pretty badly.
So it's not just about us anymore. It's about how our actions impact the whole planet, which, as we've discussed, hasn't been great so far.
Exactly. But it's important to remember that the agricultural revolution, for all its downsides, it did pave the way for everything that came after. Civilizations, empires, you name it.
So from insignificant apes to world-dominating farmers. Where do we go from here? What does Harari say about how we went from small tribes to these huge empires?
Well, that's where those shared myths, those stories we talked about earlier, come back into play. He dives into how empires and religions use these big, overarching narratives to create complex social and political structures.
Right, I remember that. Harari uses some pretty interesting examples like Hammurabi's Code and even the American Declaration of Independence to illustrate that point.
Exactly. Those documents, despite being from completely different times and places, both rely on this shared belief in a certain order, even if that order is, as we said, something we essentially made up.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, isn't it? It's like finding out the universe is a hologram or something.
It really is. But here's the thing. Harari isn't saying that these ideas are worthless just because they're imagined. He's saying that these shared myths are what allows us to work together on a massive scale. They give us rules to live by, ways to resolve conflicts, all those things that make a complex society possible.
So it's not about whether these stories are literally true or not, but whether they work.
Exactly. And that's what makes Harari's analysis so fascinating. He doesn't just stop at saying, hey, look, we made all this stuff up. He goes deeper, exploring how these stories are kept alive, how they change, how they shape the world around us.
Can you give me an example?
Well, consider the idea of human rights. We often think of them as these universal, unquestionable truths, right? But Harari argues that they're not set in stone. They're a product of very specific historical and cultural circumstances.
So even our most cherished values are part of this imagined order. That's a lot to unpack.
It is. But again, Harari isn't trying to devalue these concepts. He wants us to understand that these ideas, yeah, powerful, are still human creations, and they can be used for good or for bad.
Okay, so we're starting to see how these imagined realities influence us in really profound ways. But how did we get from small groups of hunter-gatherers to these huge empires? I mean, Harari talks about how important writing and money were, right? So
Yeah.
last time we were on those imagined realities, right? And how they're not just like myths and stuff, but the actual building blocks of empires and laws and human rights even. Crazy to think about.
Right, and how those stories, those ideas, they keep changing. As we go through history with Harari, you see how they get tied up with new tech, with who's in charge.
Okay, so this is where the scientific revolution comes in, big turning point. Where does Harari even start with that?
He actually jumps right in by saying European dominance, it wasn't just because they were smarter or had better gadgets. It's a whole new way of thinking. Like being okay with not knowing everything.
Humble.
Yeah. And this thirst for exploring, for questioning what everyone thought was true.
So not just better boats, but like better brains almost.
Exactly. Harari talks about Columbus, even with all his navigation skills, when he landed, he refused to believe it was a new continent.
Stubborn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was stuck on the old maps, the old ideas. And Harari says that's the key difference that kicks off the scientific revolution in Europe. It wasn't about being right all the time. It was the guts to be wrong, to go out there and see things fresh.
I like that. Progress by way of, oops, my bad.
Right. And this new mindset, it leads to the printing press, the telescope, discovering whole new continents. It was all about pushing boundaries, experimenting, wanting to know more.
Can't argue with the results, right? But, like we've seen this whole time, usually a but with all these leaps forward. What about the downsides of the scientific revolution? Didn't that cause problems too?
Absolutely. It didn't happen in a vacuum. It was tangled up with colonialism, with empires growing, often driven by greed and power grabs too.
Right, so you've got these scientific breakthroughs happening at the same time that empires are, conquering and exploiting people.
Exactly. Harari calls it this marriage of science and empire, which is a pretty spot-on way to put it, really. Science provided the tools, the tech, that empires could then use to expand even more.
So it's a tool, right, like a hammer can build a house or, do other things.
Exactly. And that tension between progress and its potential for harm, it runs through the whole book.
Yeah.
It just becomes even more obvious as we get to the Industrial Revolution, capitalism, all these advances, but also new kinds of inequality, environmental damage, the whole deal.
It's almost like we're wrestling with our own cleverness, isn't it, where it can lead us. But Harari, he doesn't shy away from the really big questions about the future, does he? Like all that stuff with bioengineering, AI, it's wild to think about.
And that's exactly his point. This isn't sci-fi anymore. We're at this point where we could change what it means to be human. enhance ourselves, merge with tech.
It's a bit much, honestly, to wrap my head around. Like, we're becoming a whole new kind of being.
And that is the challenge Harari leaves us with. He doesn't give the answers, but he wants us to really think about what we're doing. If we have this power to change ourselves, what choices will we make? What will it even mean to be human then?
Makes you think, that's for sure. If there's one thing I'm taking from Sapiens, it's that getting where we are now, even the messy bits, might be the only way to figure out where to go next.
Couldn't agree more. Harari says it best. We're not just at the mercy of evolution anymore. We're in charge now. So what kind of future will we choose?
And with that thought, my friends, we'll leave you to ponder. That was quite the ride through Sapiens, from insignificant apes to, well, whoever we're becoming. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and never stop learning.